So as I said, one thing that I want to tell you in person about my website, I will make the videos of the lecture available online. And the videos are available. If you scroll down in the website, there is a link, a playlist of coastal engineering. I am now pointing my mouse on the link. If you click there, you will be redirected to my YouTube webpage and to the playlist of coastal engineering. And it's still empty, but starting from today, you will find here the videos of the lectures. I kindly ask you to remind me because I am used to put videos on YouTube of my lectures since 2012. But this year, with the advent of Teams and remote teaching, sometimes I forget to start the registration, something that I didn't forget in the room in physical presence because I had my camera with me, it was automatic. Here it's less automatic, I always have to remember to start the video. Okay, let me go back to the web page of the course, and here you see also the description of the tutorial documents, and you see the list of the tutorial web pages. These are the documents that we will study together. Some of them I will kindly ask you to have a look individually in individual study hours. And the reason is that it is suggested to the professors by the university to split the education that we make available to you in frontal discussions, frontal lectures. I don't like to call the lectures. I prefer to use the term discussion. So we are suggested to split again the education in frontal discussions and self-study hours, which means that the material that is more descriptive, that you can easily study by yourself, we are invited to give this material to you for self-study hours, independent study hours, and we are invited during the frontal lectures to focus on the issues that require a more deep interaction between the teacher and the students. So, as I said, some of these documents I will tell you will be given to you for individual study. Okay. And also there are tutorials for the practical exercises. They are not many because we have only 12 hours, so we will not spend much time on exercises, but yes, we will spend some time. And these are the tutorials. Now, here you see the calendar of the lectures. Actually, I realize now that it's outdated because we missed the first lecture, and I apologize for that. So everything has to be shifted forward so ending up December 18. And now here, important information, there is written and described how I make the exam. I want to say something on that because I think this is important information. And first, let me start with a premise that is not described here. It may be that I take an agreement with Professor Archetti, and so that the exam is done by Professor Archetti also on my behalf. This was the case last year because, and the reason was that given that we are teaching several courses, we wanted to give the opportunity to students to get the exam as soon as possible. And in order to better organize ourselves, we decided to split. So Professor Archetti made the exam also for me because otherwise I couldn't make the exam before Christmas last year. This year, the situation is even more complicated because we only have a few days left before Christmas for making an exam to the students who would like to take it. Maybe that Professor Archetti already fixed her exam. What I'm planning to do is to interact with her during the next few days and ask her when she has planned the exam. Maybe that you can also write on the chat for me if you already know the date. So maybe that if I cannot make that date, maybe that I ask her to make the exam on my behalf. So in this case, what is written here and it's selected in the web page is still valid, with the only difference that the person that will be asking you the question is not me, but Professor Archetti. So it's December 21st. This was also my feeling that she made an attempt to make the exam before Christmas. In this case, I cannot because I already planned my exams in Bologna. So, but as I said, this is just a tiny difference because what is written here applies. So the exam is oral, and my exam is typically short. It's about 20-30 minutes. It's a couple of questions and maybe 3 if it's needed. And usually the first question is a question that allows you to speak a lot, because it is very important for me to evaluate your attitude in presenting things. I think it is very important for a very simple reason, because during your future career, you will have for sure the need to make interviews, to present results, and I think it is really very important that you learn already at the university how to present. So I will give you the opportunity to practice also during my lectures, but I think it is also important that at the exam, this ability to present things is assessed. So as I said, for this reason, the first question usually, if I make the exam, is a question where I ask the student to speak, basically. The other questions usually are very detailed. I go into details, and it's the meaning of the other questions is indeed to assess your abilities and your preparation on the issues that we studied together. Keep in mind that at the end of these 12 hours, I will give you a list of questions. So I want to be extremely clear on what can be asked at the exam. The reason why I want to be extremely clear is that I think this is helpful and also educational for you. If you can have a preliminary idea of the type of question I may ask, I think you may get a preliminary idea of your answer, of course. And if you practice your answer, then it's your presenting abilities are better trained. And I think this is important because, again, I want to refer to a real situation. When you go to an interview, you usually know what kind of questions can be asked. And the same thing, when you present your results, you perfectly know what you are going to present. So, I mean, I don't think it is useful to test your promptness in elaborating your presentation, your speech. This is a subsequent quality. I think as a first instance, we need to test your ability after training to present. And this is why I give you a list of questions. Of course, you shouldn't take this list of questions as a motivation for making a selection of the things that you study, of course, because otherwise, if you make this selection, then your education suffers from that. It's a negative impact on your education. So you should study everything in the same manner. But and the list of questions should be used only to practice. Of course, if you skip topics, because I tell you, you will see that there will be some topics which I will tell you I'm not asking this at the exam, like no question at the exam. This doesn't mean that you don't have to study these topics. And sorry, these are trivial suggestions, but I think it is important that I am clear. Because of course, if I give you something to study, it's because I think it is for you beneficial, it's useful. And if you skip this, of course, it has a negative impact on your preparation. Okay, I think one last thing. How I form my mark. Of course, if the exam is done by Professor Archetti, this may not apply. First, I give 30, which is the full mark, to students who demonstrate a full knowledge of the notions and a very good ability to present. Sometimes it happens that I tell students, look, your mark is 28, and students don't understand why. And I say, okay, your replies were perfect, but your presentation was not perfect. So keep in mind that I am also evaluating presentation and preparation. You may ask me, but what are your suggestions for delivering a good presentation? I tell you, I will tell you later. So we will have the opportunity to discuss how to present things. And for now, let's skip this, and I will give you suggestions. But just let me say that it's important that you don't speak too much and you don't speak too less, of course. You have to elaborate an ideal synthesis. Of course, if I tell you that my exam is 20 minutes, you cannot take 15 minutes for the first question. And the first question ideally should take at most 5-8 minutes to reply, and then the other questions. Okay, and let me see. There is something written here about my plan for exams, and I think it is confirmed as it's written here, but please take into account that I want to agree the dates with Professor Archetti, and so I believe we will have one in December, probably December 21st, and this will be done by Professor Archetti. I believe we will have 2 in January, but let me say nothing more, because the dates I would prefer to fix with her. And just if you already know the dates of Professor Archetti in January, please write on the chat. Okay, now contact details. I have my email is alberto.montanari@unibo.it, and it's written on my website, so you will find it. And if you need additional explanations regarding to the lectures, my very enthusiastic invitation to you is to ask questions during the lectures. This is my dream. If we could engage into a discussion rather than a lecture, I would really appreciate that. So please note that I don't really mind if you interrupt me. It's not an interruption, it's a discussion again. And this is the best way. And also, you may have some doubts later on when you are studying the lecture. It's also a good practice for me if you, before starting the next lecture, engage into a discussion with me regarding the previous lecture. So next Friday, if you have questions on what I'm teaching today, please feel free at the beginning of the lecture or during the break to ask me questions. Again, this is the way I prefer. And of course, I am available also for individual discussion over Teams, and I am also available by email for email discussion. Okay, I think this is what I should say about how the course is organized. Now, I would like to say something more before I start with the actual lecture on the way I am teaching. And for this reason, I invite you to click on the first, I was saying, to click on the first link. Actually, it's not necessary that you click, I click. And let me now start this premise. How do I teach? What is my teaching method? Okay, before I move forward, let me move to a mirror website, because this website is fine, but it has the sidebar. The sidebar during the lecture is not useful. It only takes space. So this is a mirror without the sidebar. Okay, so this is my premise. Sorry. Let me see. No, it's not my. It's not the link I wanted to click. This is the link, the first one, the learning process. Let me just see if I have. No, I don't have any PowerPoint here. Okay, so what is my teaching method? First of all, let me say that what I'm really motivated to do with you is to give a contribution as much as I can. In 12 hours, I can't do much, but I would like to give you a contribution regarding your skills. Besides that, besides your knowledge, I would like really to help you to improve your skills. Skills means that you are in the best conditions. Skills are what allows you to profit from your knowledge. So my dream is to put you in the best conditions to profit from your knowledge. If you have knowledge, but you don't have the skills, it's a problem. A skill is, for instance, the ability to present. A skill is communication abilities, which means that you are able to communicate your knowledge and your results. So I really would like also to help you in this. And I would like to do that because I don't think it is difficult. The first thing that you need to improve your skills is to know what your skills could be. And I think it is very useful to look at the Wikipedia page that describes the 21st century skills. Now, look at this web page, like the other web pages where I have my supporting material for students. You will find in these web pages several links. What are the links? First, let me say, I think this is a big advantage of having the supporting document in the form of a web page, because I may have links. Links, it's something that allows you to get additional information. This is information that I don't think you strictly require at this stage. In 12 hours, I cannot explore the whole information related to coastal engineering that may be useful for you. So I focus on a main, let me call it this way, a main information, and then I put the additional information available to you through links. So when should you click on the links? When you are stimulated, when you feel it may be interesting. And this also allows you to train to be creative, because creativity comes from feelings, ideas. And then if you read, like in this case, 21st century skills, and you feel attracted, you just have to click on the links. A second page appears. Typically, it's a Wikipedia page. I will tell you why. And here there is a description of what the community of educators think are the main skills that young people will need in order to be able to effectively contribute to societal development in the 21st century. So I think that sometimes you may have this question mark in your mind. What should I inspect? What should I get experienced in? In what kind of human activity I would like to be the best? And so this is what this group of educators try to do when identifying these main skills. Now, we are not reading this web page, so I close it, and let me go back to my web page, where you find here this table, which is taken by the Wikipedia page, where the 21st century skills are summarized. They are divided in 3 categories: learning and innovation, the 4 C's, digital literacy, and career and life. So let's have a rapid look. critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, communication, collaboration. So when you go to an interview, what is searching for the person that hires an engineer? What are the qualities of the engineer, the skills of the engineer that the company, the person is looking for? Precisely these four. Today, the industry, the public institutions, they are looking for people that are good in problem solving. They are looking for creative people. They are looking for people who are very good team workers, collaboration, and they are looking for people that are good in communication. And, you know, these are not very difficult skills to achieve. It's relatively easy. The first step is that you have to be aware of what these people, hiring persons, are looking for. Now, digital literacy means knowledge, digital knowledge, so knowledge on information, on the media, and ICT technology. And this is what they are also looking for. And also career and life, also these are very important. There is some overlaps between these skills. Let's look on career and life. Flexibility and adaptability. There is some overlap with collaboration. Now, initiative and self-direction means there is overlap with creativity. Self-direction means that you are independent. You don't need to be assisted. Social and cross-cultural interaction. There is an intersection and overlap with communication. Productivity and accountability. It is extremely important. Accountability now is a quality that is searched by the employers. What is accountability? Is the possibility to check your results, to check if you reached your objectives. There is an increasing tendency today to work after objectives. So the hiring person fixes some objective for you, and you have to demonstrate that you reach the goals. And the ability to check if you reach the goals is precisely accountability, leadership and responsibility. So these are the qualities that I really would like to take the opportunity to discuss with you. This is something that I do in all of my courses. It's not related to coastal engineering, not only related to coastal engineering, it's not only related to hydrology, it's related to everything. Okay, and then look at this graph. Usually in the classical teaching, you have a a top-down approach. Top is theory and down is solutions. In our case, solution is a design, a project. Instead, I would like to take a reverse approach, a bottom-up approach, which starts from the knowledge of what we need. So I would like to focus on the solution. What do we need? I need to protect a beach. Perfect. So let me now discuss what are the design variables that I need. Once I identify the design variables, let's study the models that allow me to get to the design variables. And then once I identify the models, let me look at the theory. The theory is essential. If you don't understand the theory, you cannot judge whether a solution is appropriate. You cannot make any testing. So the theory is essential. But I would like, ideally, this is not always possible, but ideally, I would like that the theory comes last, because it's much easier. If you start from the theory, at the beginning, you don't understand what is the purpose of what you're studying. And so you may get confused. If we start from the end, the solution, then we understand the reason why we need a theory. And ideally, if we are able to follow this approach, we also avoid to study unnecessary theory. Studying is never lost time, never. But at the same time, you have to be efficient. So given that you don't have much time for studying, it's extremely important that you start by studying what is necessary for you, what gives to you a boost, what gives to you opportunities. And this is why I like the idea of focus only on the necessary theory at the beginning, with the awareness that it's never lost time if you study. So if you make, let's say, a mistake and you study something more, it's not really a big mistake. It's something that may lead you to be less efficient, but still useful. But ideally, I would like also to help you in reaching efficiency. Okay, and have a read also this page. It takes 5 minutes. And if you need some more discussion on it, I'm very open, okay? And let me say that in general, why I refer to Wikipedia. I have some colleagues that are critical with respect to Wikipedia. They say that it's not reliable, and I don't think so. I think it is extremely reliable if you refer to Wikipedia in English. Wikipedia, I think it's reliable because it's subjected to a universal check. Of course, if you go to Wikipedia in a native language, Wikipedia in Italian is less reliable than Wikipedia in English. So an open information becomes reliable when it's accessed by several people. When it's accessed by several people, I think it's a reliable information. If it is something that is accessed by a few people, then you have to be careful. So this is everything that you find on the web should be assessed for reliability before using it. And one criteria that you have to use is the number of people that have access to the web page and have the possibility to correct the web page. So this is why in my educational material, which is, I mean, it's critical material because I can't run the risk, I can't take the risk to provide you any incorrect information. This is why I refer to Wikipedia, because I think it is widely tested. Sometimes I refer to individual web pages of individual researchers, for instance, but before doing that, I make a refined assessment, because in principle, you have to be very careful with the material that you find on the web. But I think Wikipedia is a good reference. And as a final consideration, let me say that I think the open source information is a great opportunity because it's really up to date. When is when it is checked by many people, it is something that I believe is very reliable. And Wikipedia, I think, for this reason, is not only reliable, it's really a good opportunity. Keep in mind that science and technology are really progressing fast. So we don't teach like we used to teach 10 years ago. The topics are different. There are new methods, new material. So using books is becoming more and more difficult because books are not updated with the same pace as the information and the knowledge is progressing. Information and knowledge are really progressing fast. So referring to open information is really a very good way to remain up to date. Okay, so let me now go back to the previous page and let's start with our course. So what I would like to discuss with you, if you look at these titles, you get an idea. So first, I want to focus on the cost management and beach design. I will make a premise, a descriptive premise today, and then I will pass to a topic that is fascinating, in my opinion, which is beach hydrodynamics and morphodynamics. The purpose of this topic is to learn how to model the evolution of beaches. And keep in mind, modeling implies understanding. Modeling implies the ability to find solutions. So if we want to preserve a beach that is subjected to erosion, for instance, we need first to understand how erosion evolves And then we have also to learn how to write a model. The model may be empirical, may be mathematical, may be expert knowledge, but if we want to make a design, we need a model. Even if the design is done by expert knowledge, by intuition, nevertheless, you have identified a model and you use it. So I think this is fascinating because it will focus on mathematical modeling of beach dynamics, hydrodynamics in this case. But this, let me say that this lecture here, it's a lecture that takes some of our energy, and because it's mathematical. Okay, the next one is more descriptive, is sea wave monitoring, and it focuses on how waves are monitored. I think it is important because when you use an observation, when you use data, it is extremely important that you know how the data were collected. Why it is extremely important? Because data are always uncertain. And when you make a design, when you estimate a design variable, an essential requirement is that you get an idea of the uncertainty of the design. And so this is why I think to know how data are collected is important. And then, but as I said, this will be not very technical, it's descriptive. And then there is saltwater intrusion. This is another fascinating topic. I think it is fascinating because saltwater intrusion is a big problem. And to learn how it evolves, I think it's really interesting. This is mathematical, but not very difficult. Beach hydrodynamics and morphodynamics is a bit more difficult. And then the last topic is nature-based solutions for coastal protection, which means the name explains, the title of the lecture is self-explaining. And it's a descriptive lecture. If we will have time, I would say yes. I will add another lecture, which is climate change and descriptive again, but I think it would be useful if you knew something related on climate change, and in particular, if you know something of what we know about climate change and how we should make design if we want to account for climate change. Keep in mind, this is really innovative because to date, we don't have any, let's say, consolidated technical guideline on how to make engineering design in the presence of climate change. And this is a big issue. But this is the truth. So you very often listen about climate change, possible solutions, but you never listen from engineers telling how climate change should be accounted for. Actually, as I said, it's a developing issue, and I really would like to touch base with you very briefly on what could be the evolution of the future in this respect. And also let me say that the reason why we still are missing a technical design is that climate change is still it's still studied with a disciplinary approach, not interdisciplinary. And so I think that if the scientific community decided to put knowledge together, decided to be very interdisciplinary, and decided to involve not only climate scientists in the study of climate change, but also engineers, I think our comprehension would be much improved, and engineers would be able to give very useful guidelines on how the technical design could be improved, evolved. But this is still something that it's doesn't take off, and still interdisciplinary science is still a rarity. It's not very frequent. Okay, now let me make this premise then. Cost management and beach design. First of all, let me, I have a PowerPoint for this lecture. If you go down, there is, in the bottom of the page, there is the PowerPoint that you can download. Now I am downloading it and I'm using the PowerPoint. What is the reason why I also prepared for some of the lectures a PowerPoint? Because these documents are very good to, very good, let's say, in my intention. They are very good for studying, I hope so, but they are not very good as a reference for the lectures because there is too much text and it is distracting at the end. So let me open the PowerPoint then. So let me download it so I can check whether the links are still good. So I opened the PowerPoint. It went on the other screen. So let me make a change of the screen. So let me take this here and this here. Let's hope that I can work out. Yeah. Okay, good. I think you should see it. And let me put it in presentation mode. Not yet. 1 second. Let me presentation. Okay, you should see the presentation now. And just 1 second, I need to get organized with the second screen. Sorry. Okay, the second screen is here. Okay, good. Okay, so this premise is descriptive. So coastal engineering is focusing on the coastlines, which are, we know that, relevant environments with extremely relevant socio-economical and ecological value. Coastal areas, keep in mind, occupy less than 15% of the Earth's land surface, but accommodate more than 40% of the world population. This is one reason why I'm fascinated by the coastlines, why I think they are really important. It's, 40% of the world population. And if you move to Italy, it's 60% of the total population that lives in coastal areas. And about 24% of the population of Italy is concentrated in big coastal cities. If you go to the whole world, about more than 1 billion people live within 100 kilometers of coastline and within 100 meters of altitude above sea level. This is amazing. It really tells you how much coasts are important from a societal point of view. And in fact, we know that coasts are also coasts, including the coast of lakes, of big lakes. These coasts are an important feature of any country. It is well known that sea resources play an important role in the economic development of a country. And sea resources include fishing, seaborne trade, tourism, and related commercial activities. And in fact, in general, the countries with a longer extension of the seashore have a more prosperous economy. It is a resource, like for other country is agriculture, for other country is oil, etc. And in fact, there are in the world a few landlocked countries. Let me see if I have a picture here. Let me see, no, not here. So let me go back, sorry, to the previous slide. And let me show you this picture on my website. 1 second. This is a presentation of the landlocked countries in the world. Landlocked means that they don't have direct access to the sea, or they have a very limited access. And it's not surprising that they are only a few, because being landlocked is impacting, has a negative impact on the economy. has a negative impact on the country itself. And for this reason, during their development, countries self-organized also through wars to get an access to the sea. In fact, those landlocked countries usually are not prosperous countries. They have, for this reason, their economy and the GDP, etc., is suffering. So the coasts are indeed an important resource for a country. So what is the definition of a coastline? Let me see here, the next slide. The coastline is the line that forms the boundary between the land and the ocean, or a sea or a lake, at their high tide mark. Please do remember the definitions, and they are extremely important, and I will give you also some additional references on terminology later on. The coastline has also an interesting feature, and which is the coastline paradox. It's interesting. I am mentioning this paradox because I think it is an interesting discussion. So what is the coastline paradox? The coastline paradox, there is a link on my website to the Wikipedia page that describe it, is that you can't define the length of a coastline for a country, because as you refine the scale of the map, the length of the coastline increases, ever increases. So you get a scale of 1/1 million, and then you estimate a length of the coastline. If you go to a scale of 1/1000, then you get more details. And so the length of the coastline increases. And then if you go to a scale of 1/110, the length increases again. So there is no upper limit, and experiments have been made. So in order to define the length of a coastline, start by assuming a scale of representation. And this, why I think this paradox is interesting, because it gives to you an idea of the complexity of the coast. It gives to you an idea of the complex structure of the coast. The coast is not like a line. It's absolutely not a line. So very often we assume that the coast is rectilinear. It is not. And this means that indeed we are already introducing an assumption, a simplification. And again, I think it is nice because it shows that it's very interesting to study the coast. Now, it is interesting, by the way, to see for some countries the ratio between length of the coastline and the surface of the country. And there is a link on my webpage. I list it here. I give now, it's here. It's on the screen now. And first, there is an explanation of the coastline paradox here on the right for the UK. And if you go down, you see the ratio, the coast area ratio for several countries. And it's interesting because you may notice that the higher the ratio and the higher the likelihood of a good GDP. And this is an additional information on what I mentioned before on the importance of the coastline. Okay. Now, what are the drivers that shape the coastline? And why I think it is important to discuss these drivers? Because again, we have to understand how coasts work. So we have to understand the processes in order to be able to write a model, in order to be able to write, to identify our solution. What is the solution that we need? we are studying coastal engineering because we need to protect the coasts. We need to maintain the coasts or to restore them. So this is the kind of solution that we need. Why do we have this need? Because we learned that the coasts are very important, so need to be protected. And they are important for the several reasons that we discussed, but the coasts are vulnerable because there is a huge population making a pressure on this environment. They are vulnerable because these are flat areas exposed to coastal floods, exposed to pollution, because they are a permeable environment. Permeable means that if you have a pollution at the land surface, it can go deep into the ground. They are vulnerable because it's vulnerable to sea. And again, there is a high pressure, a lot of people. And keep in mind that, of course, a lot of people means pollution, means pressure. So they are vulnerable, we need to protect them. This is our solution. And for identifying the solution, again, I repeat my reasoning, we need a model and we need a theory. So we need to understand the main drivers. And what are the drivers that shape the coast line? For certain types of coasts, it is fluvial deposition and erosion caused by waves. So for certain types of coasts, which we will see in detail later, what types of coasts, for these coasts, the origin was fluvial deposition. Rivers bring sediments, they enter into the sea, and these sediments settle down. The sediments settle down because the velocity of the water decreases, and also there is confrontation with the seawater. So where the two currents, the sea current and the fluvial current, get together, there is again an interface which causes the deposition of sediments. And so this is typically the origin of the beaches, of the sand beaches. But given that they are loose material, they are formed by loose material, they are also exposed to erosion. So there is an interaction between the action of the river, the fluvial erosion, the fluvial deposition and the wave erosion, which shapes the coastline. Now, what happens? So, for instance, think at the coast of the Adriatic Sea in Italy. How was it formed? Originally, the place where Ravenna is, where Bologna is, was a gulf, a huge gulf that was filled by the Po River, filled with sediments from the Apennines and the Alps. And these sediments are of greater size in the upper part of the river. And as long as the river approaches the sea, the size of the sediment decreases. At the end, at the delta, it's sand. So at the beginning, there was a lot of sand transported by the Po River, which settled down at the mouth of the river. And when you have an excess of sand, you have more exposure to sea erosion. So the sand of the Po River, as accumulates, is eroded and transported along the coast. This originated our coastline. In the long term, if you don't have disturbances, you reach equilibrium. Equilibrium between the sediment that is transported by the river and the sediment that is eroded by the sea and displaced somewhere else. This equilibrium is perfect because it's a long-term condition. It's a permanent, let's say, it's an asymptotic behavior which tends to remain there. But we had the human impact. The human impact is a perturbation. Perturbation means that humans for instance, started to extract sand from the mouth of the Po River because they needed the sand for building engineering, for buildings and for roads. So as the sand was extracted, erosion increased. And this is basically why now we have the beaches on the Adriatic Sea that are exposed to erosion, because originally we extracted the sand. So now we have the need to protect the beaches from erosion in order to, let's say, give a contribution to re-establishing an equilibrium. This is our need. Now, so there are these beaches that are governed, shaped by erosion deposition processes. Now let's focus sorry, there is one more thing that I would like to say. Other beaches are originated by land uplift, tectonic movements, and at the same time sea erosion, marine erosion, which establishes a different type of equilibrium and a different type of coastline. Now let's focus on the types of coastlines. One more thing that we have to learn is to recognize the coast. So the first thing that we have to do when we get over a coast, because somebody called us because there is a problem, is to understand the type of coast we are dealing with, to understand the dynamics of the coast. And classification is very useful to this end. So to know how coasts are classified is useful. So let's see. First of all, for classifying the coastline, we may use several different criteria. We may use descriptive criteria, which are based on morphological or lithological parameters. And so basically we studied the morphology of the coast and we classify the coast in this way. Or we may use a genetic criteria, which is based on the analysis of the processes that led to the formation and modeling of the coast shape. So we focus not on the morphology, but rather on the processes. So a first descriptive criteria, for instance, let me go to the next slide here, allows one to divide the coast forms in two categories. We may have cliffed coasts, and these cliffed coasts are originated by erosion and are characterized by highly sloping or vertical transition between the land and the sea. And this is, in most of the cases, a coast that is originated by, according to a genetic classification, it's originated typically by land uplift. But let's focus on the descriptive criteria. Cliffed coast. A steep one typically may be a rocky one, and they are characterized by the presence of so-called pocket beaches, which are isolated and small beaches with low slope, typically located at the outlet of rivers, for instance. Or we may have, again, according to a descriptive criteria, the flat coast, which is originated by deposition and has a very limited slope. The flat coast is the coast of the Adriatic Sea, close to Ravenna. And in the flat coast, we have typically the beaches. And what is a beach? Again, an important definition, because we have to be very clear, because the beach is extremely important. It's one of the most vulnerable environments that we may find on a coastline. So it's extremely important to understand what is. And be aware of the fact that learning the terminology is again extremely important for communication. If you don't know the terminology, you can't communicate well. And what is even worse, if you don't know the terminology, if you make mistakes and you call a beach something that is not a beach, you may lose the confidence of your client, of the person who is calling you, is committing you to a project, to a job. So terminology is important. So what is the beach? The beach is an accumulation, is defined as an accumulation of loose sediments of varying size and type. And again, the beach is defined as an accumulation of loose sediment of varying size and type. The shape and the forms of the beach are mainly determined by mechanical forcing, including tides, waves, currents, etc. And the sediments may be provided by cliff erosion, because beaches can also be in a cliff coast, and usually they are small, and they may be formed by fluvial deposition, as I said before, or by cliff erosion. Okay, and this here in this picture, sorry, I show you the picture 1 second, because it's on the website. Here it is. Let me expand the picture. Here in this picture, you see a flat coast, and you see that there is some sand, but also here you see a human intervention. What is this accumulation of loose stones? It is called a groin. And the groin, the purpose of the groin, in Italian is pennello. The purpose of the groin is to arrest, to block the sediment transport along shore. This definition we will discuss later. But again, the reason why this picture is placed here is that this is an example of flat coast. Okay, let's remove the picture. Now, let's now talk about a genetic criteria. And keep in mind, I'm not discussing all the criteria for classifying beaches, only or for classifying coasts. I'm only mentioning the main ones, and I leave to you the study of more details if you are interested. There are a lot of links here. As I said, genetic criteria. A very used genetic criteria to classify coasts is the distinction between emergent and submergent coasts. Let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So emergent coasts may be originated by an uplift of the land or a decrease of the sea level. Emergent coasts may be characterized by the presence of rocky cliffs and flat platforms. For instance, an interesting example is the west coast of North America. It's an excellent example of emerging coastline. Submergent coasts are those, as you can read on the slides, that have been inundated by sea because of land subsidence or sea level increase, for instance, due to climate change. And keep in mind that climate change is a primary reason of concern today. But it was also an important reason of change of Earth morphology in the past. In the past, we had changes in sea level elevation of more than 100 meters during glaciations. And the glaciations, lasted for millions of years. So there are today, as you well know, there are zones, lands of the Earth that were submerged, and now they are below sea level, but in the past they were well above the sea level. So you can understand how a submergent coast may have formed. And an example of a very nice example of a submerged coast is given by this picture. Let me show it to you. It's again on my website. This is the Chesapeake Bay in North America. And you see that it looks like a gulf. Actually, this is a submerged coast. It was submerged by sea level rise after the last glaciation. And here you can see the complexity of this environment. You can see an example, a perfect example of the coastline paradox. And you can understand the ecologic value of this environment. You see, it's green everywhere. Very often, these are areas that are not heavily urbanized because they are exposed to sea level rise, to sea flooding. And so usually these are not the first lands that are occupied by humans. And for this reason, very often they have an ecological environment that is really to be preserved. Okay, let me go back to here. Go back to the PowerPoint. And let me see. There is a link that I just wanted. No, it's a link to the figure, so I don't think it is worth showing you on the screen. Now, there is a discussion on my lectures, which I give you to read, on the social function and value of seaports, and there are some information provided in a quantitative form. And one second that I go to the next slide here. Okay, here I am. Okay, the picture was already on the PowerPoint. I'm sorry for that. I didn't remember. So you see here the picture that I already showed you before. And so, as I said, there is a long discussion, not really long, but there is a discussion on my website on the social function of beaches, ports, and coastal areas in general. So as I told you, I leave this information to you to read. And in general, keep in mind that this is usually something that if it's asked at the exam, it is asked as a first question. So it may happen that if I make the exam, I ask you, can we please discuss why beaches are important for sustainable development, for social development? And then in order to provide a reply, you have to speak, of course. It's not a quantitative question. In order to provide a reply, you may say something related to this discussion, to this slide that you see here. And but I will not go into the details. There are numbers reported on my web pages. You don't know, of course, to learn the numbers by memory. It's absolutely useless. There is a consideration which is you can see a summary here in this slide about the ecology of beaches, and it tells you these considerations explain to you why also the ecology of beaches is important. And keep in mind that this is something that we realized only recently. First, you have to understand that up to the Second World War, so up to 1960, if you look at Italy, there was no tourism along the coast. So if you look to the Adriatic Sea now, you see that close to Ravenna, for instance, you see that there are infrastructures everywhere for tourism. If you go back 60 years, there was nothing. There was just sand, just beaches. There were some ports. There was a fishing activity that was indeed the main resource for people living there. But tourism came, as I said, 60 years ago, which means that we understood the importance of beaches only recently. At the beginning, tourism had a limited impact, and then we realized that beach erosion was an issue, but we realized it like 40 years ago, not before. We realized that sea pollution was an issue because we had the growth of vegetation, of algae. But we realized this only, let's say, 40, 50 years ago. And this gives to you a reason why coastal engineering is a young discipline. If you look at the history of coastal engineering, it is an history that goes back only 50 years and not much more. Only in some isolated places, there was some preliminary experiments, ancient experiments to protect the coast. This is something that we realized only recently. And finally, in the very recent past, we realized that the ecology of beaches was important. And we realized this because the ecology of beaches, for instance, in the Adriatic Sea after tourism was destroyed. So what you see now, it's not the original environment. It's a fully modified environment. In order to see the original environment, you have to go in places where there is the free beach, the so-called free beach, which is free access beach, which is not maintained. And you can see there some features that we will see are an essential element of beach, like the dune and the vegetation, because we have vegetation in the beaches. If they are natural, if they are pristine, there is vegetation and there is a fauna. And we understood only recently, I would say 20, 30 years ago, that this vegetation, this ecosystem, this ecology is essential for beach preservation. And this is why I wanted to dedicate a slide, because it is something that is still poorly understood, and something that is becoming more and more important. In fact, we will dedicate some room in our lectures to nature-based solutions for coastal protection. I think this is the last slide. I'm not spending much time on it because we will have a lecture. But I just wanted to mention you the problem of saltwater intrusion. And again, this is a big issue that was discovered by humanity only recently. And how does it mean saltwater intrusion? What does it mean, saltwater intrusion? It means that at the land and at the coastline, you have an interaction in the ground, in the underground. You have an interaction between fresh water coming from the land and salt water coming from the sea. Because we usually assume that the only transfer of water from land to sea is through rivers. Of course, there must be a transfer of water from the land to the sea. You understand why? Because it rains over the land, and this rain, sooner or later, gets into the sea, because it comes from a higher elevation. And we assume that this transfer mainly occurs through rivers. It is not true, because rivers are very local. Along the whole coastline, there is a continuous flow in the underground, or of course, in the permeable regions, there is a continuous flow from the land in the underground to the sea. On the other hand, there is also the pressure of water coming from the sea that tries to intrude into the land. And so the result of this confrontation is an interface that you can see in this figure, an interface in the underground between salt water and fresh water. It is convenient for us that this interface is pushed back into the ocean. Why? Because the salt water cannot be used by humans, cannot be used for irrigation, cannot be used for drinking, for civil consumption, for civil use. And therefore, it's much better if it stays into the ocean. On the other hand, the result of the human impact is an amplification of saltwater intrusion. Why is that? We will study it. Let's for now just take into account that saltwater intrusion is a threat. It's a danger. It's a challenge. Something that we need to study and understand. And also, I would like to add that if you want to have vegetation in over the land, you have to push the saltwater intrusion in the deep underground. Otherwise, of course, if the roots get in touch with the saltwater, you cannot have vegetation. Okay, so now I have the slides on coastal hydrodynamics and morphodynamics. Let me move forward. I just want to, yes, these are the slides. And I think we need a break now before moving to what is the next lecture, because if you go back to my website, we completed here the first document. And so at this stage, we need to go back to the list of documents and go to the next one, beach hydrodynamics and morphodynamics. I would like to make a break. I also need it, and I think we may take a break of 15 minutes. But before taking the break and fixing the time we reconvene, I wanted to ask you if you have any question. And I hope that I was, my description, I hope it was exciting enough. I spoke a lot, but actually the concepts are, as you know, very simple. And the information that I gave to you is not so extended, although I think it is important. Any question?
No questions for me, Prof.
Okay.
It was clear and good.